Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Noble Company podcast. My name is Roanne Smith. I am your host. And for those who are new to the podcast, I'll give you a brief overview. The Noble Company podcast is dedicated to contemporary topics in business and features experts, academics, and entrepreneurs from across the globe. Today, we discussed the topic mental wellness is great for business. And although many of us seem to know this in theory, personally, we're not always able to find the balance. And many organizations are so focused on the bottom line that there's significant neglect of their duty of care to employees. So, in this month of mental health awareness, I thought it would be a good time to get some more insight into this topic and what we can do as individuals and organizations to manage mental wellness. Now, I'm no expert, so what I've done is what any sensible business person would do, and that is to outsource expertise. So today I have Ms. Zoe Shim and Professor Dwayne Devonish. And as usual, I'm going to start with the ladies first. So, Zoe Shim is a counseling educational psychologist and has been practicing for over 12 years, specifically through the Ministry of Health in Jamaica. She's also a full-time lecturer at the University of Technology, Jamaica. She's passionate about mental health and spreading awareness about the importance of maintaining good mental health, treating and preventing mental illness. Welcome, Zoe.
Thanks for having me. Happy
Thank
to
you.
be here.
Perfect. Now we'll go to Dr. Dwayne Devonish. He is a professor of management and organizational behavior in the Department of Management Studies under the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. He currently serves as the youngest professor at the institution. His main interests include organizational behavior and psychology, work-related stress, health and wellness, human resource management, and strategic planning. He has published extensively on these subjects in both regional and international journals, conducted practical training workshops, and engaged in diverse research-based consultancies in these same areas for various organizations. He was the lead author of the National Workplace Wellness Policy of Barbados in 2019, the only policy of its kind, and currently sits as a member of the National Committee on Workplace Wellness under the Ministry of Labour, Social Partnership Relations, and the Third Sector. Welcome, Dwayne.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. All right, so let's get started. Now, again, like we would have said, Zoe is from Jamaica, Dwayne is from Barbados. So we're all from the region, and I would like to get your idea of how mental health is viewed in your respective cultures.
I suppose I'll jump in here first. Well, it's a very mixed review, I would say, and it's pretty much based on generation. I would find that the younger generation is a bit more cognizant of the importance of mental health. I don't think that as a country we are quite there yet in terms of making it a priority. There's still a lot of shame associated with having mental struggles, things like anxiety, struggling with depression. It's often seen as like it's more viewed by older generations, I find, in Jamaica as neglect of faith or religion, so to speak, and oftentimes it's viewed as a point of weakness, so to speak, like you're not able to manage your responsibilities. And so there is quite a lot of education that goes into, empowering HR and staff in general to be able to understand how to utilize their sick days and things like that. So it's still something that I find that it's something that still we struggle with in terms of knowing how to go about taking care of oneself once there is illness there.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
how about you, Dwayne?
Yes, I agree with Zoe. I think in Barbados it's like a mixed bag, and that variance in how people see mental health occurs across generations, educational levels, even in terms of people's contact with persons with mental illness or mental health challenges. What I have found in a recent research that I've done a few years ago, in terms of how private sector managers and public sector managers in Barbados, how they view mental health and mental illness, is quite interesting, because what I found was that even though both private sector managers and public sector managers understood conceptually what mental health was, there were a number of signs of stigma and prejudicial attitudes towards persons with mental health challenges and mental illness. There's this particular stereotype that if you're mentally ill, you're automatically violent for some reason. There are also there are also attributions of mentally ill persons to being weak, being unable to take care of themselves. And it's unfortunate because it reflects not only a lack of empathy, but really a lack of understanding. And I think this coincides with Zoe's point. There really needs to be more public education and awareness building across the region about mental health and mental illness, even if you're at the top of your game as a manager of a private or public sector entity.
And I know that with COVID, there's been a lot of conversation about the effect on mental health. And is that something that you've seen like a dramatic rise in the incidences of mental illnesses or, absences at work due to mental illness? Is that something that you have seen?
A
Anybody can
hundred percent. I wouldn't say necessarily absence, but I would say a decrease in performance, because I find where persons are still trying to show up, they're thinking that, oh, this is just how I am now. Oftentimes, when I introduce concepts like high functioning anxiety, anticipatory stress, high functioning depression, everyone is like, oh, I thought that was just a personality trait. A lot of it is linked to being a control freak or just being a worrisome person. So oftentimes I'm finding that there is a lot of denial um, amongst persons. So they're struggling, working through this fog of mental illness. And when I speak about mental illness in the workplace, I really see a lot more having to do with, anxiety and mood disorders. And so, I definitely see where persons are struggling with that, but still trying to function despite. And it's not until there is a major fallback or they have something tangible to show that, oh, I'm not performing well, or something actually that can be quantified, for example, a family member that has passed away, that they can justifiably say to themselves that, oh, I'm having a hard time. They don't associate everyday challenges and stressors as being a part of a struggle. And so a lot of the times, it's usually just in interacting with persons in the workplace, you recognize that, oh, you know you're struggling, right? You probably need to take a break. And they'll be like, no, I'm fine, I can manage. That's always the shrug off. It's almost the weekend, man. And so, that's generally the tone of that type of reception that I'm seeing here. And for sure, persons are being more vocal about it. I find with younger persons are definitely being more vocal. However, unfortunately, it's often received as being dramatic. I'm not managing, or it's just exams, or online schooling is stressful. And of course, the older generations are like, you have it so easy. What are you saying? What are you stressed about? And so there's a lot of conflicting messages. And how and persons are ill-equipped to receive that message of saying, hey, I'm struggling. They don't know how to respond, I'm finding.
Yeah, yeah, and Zoe is absolutely correct. I can piggyback from her on the point that there are a number of senior, and when I say senior managers, not just based on experience, but because of their age and the kind of experience that they have had dealing with
Mm-hmm.
challenges. The first thing that they would say, but when I was your age and I had to deal with it, so man up or
Yeah.
woman up and deal with it. And I think this is something that we really need to relook at in terms of the level of support that people working remotely, and we know the stress and challenges of working remotely, and even persons returning to the physical site, the level of support that is required. And I think is I think
Yeah.
is behooves managers that to take a closer and a vigilant assessment of their workforce to really understand those triggers. Because I mean, Rohan, you started this session by saying that a lot of people do not see the link between mental health and the bottom line. It's almost they treat it as mutually exclusive goals,
Mm-hmm.
and they're
Mm-hmm.
actually quite linked. Because I've had research that demonstrated that billions of dollars have been lost in the US due to mental health challenges or neglected mental health at work. So it is a direct link. It does make a direct link in terms of your mental health and whether that's compromised to the bottom line. So I think we need to take it much more seriously.
And I do want to add on to what he is saying just now, because we are seeing where there are certain countries in the world that are examining shortening the work week so that
Yeah,
there is more time for persons to live out their personal lives and have avenues to socialize and to vent and to tend to their mental health. I know that in Japan now they're evaluating if they should switch to a 4-day work week. And there are other countries where there are they are contemplating having a minister of loneliness, just in response to
Oh,
wow,
persons inability to, yeah, fun fact, right? In Australia, they actually have within their Ministry of Labor creating a seat for the Minister of Loneliness so that they can actually make it a priority to educate persons in the workplace to say, if you work from home, you need to go to an office once a week and just see people. Create avenues so that you can interact and be like not lost in your own world of struggling, and to be able to get out and get help and access, and to have time that you're not just in this humdrum of I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I'm depressed, but I still am expected to perform. I'm barely doing my deadlines and things like that. So we see where there are certain countries that are definitely paying attention to these statistics, and the contrast between having happy staff versus staff that's just there doing their hours.
for sure. I can relay a story in 2020. Just this is in Barbados when the government would have shut down the entire economy. If you all remember, the airports were shut and people were laid off, and it was just at the brink of returning. The government was kind of returning to reopening the economy, and I remember I was doing a session with some recently laid off workers who were being called back by employers in the hotel sector. And the employers would say, you can come back. We have sanitizing machines. We have the physical distancing markers. We have the protocols for mask wearing. And you know what these hotel workers said to me? They said, but, Professor Devonish, I mean, the hotel workers were so angry. They were saying that these persons laid us off. They decided to do all of these protocols, install them, and now they're asking us to come back like if nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminded me of something my grandmother said, and it's correct. She said, "There's no amount of mask wearing, physical distancing, hand sanitizing that can address the mental health anxieties of workers who want to who want to be heard. The input is so critical. I think what these hotel workers wanted was an opportunity to input into the same health and safety protocols, the same interventions that are actually put into place to help them and assist them. And I think what is being called now, I think in this pandemic, is that partnership between employees and management, and not that management is to do this independent of employees and just shove it down their throats.
Yeah, there was a similar pushback in Jamaica as well. And one of the main notes across the different work groups was just the level of expendability that they felt. The fact
Wow.
that they just got an email and that said, don't come in tomorrow, and we'll let you know if and when you should come back. And just that whole uprooting of their world and that lack of feeling value, and then to be called back in and say, okay, so before you were doing 8 hours and you're producing this much, we need you to make up for lost time and get that done, as if they did not have a salary for the last 6 to 8 months or however long, and that definitely takes a toll on self-esteem, self-value, the confidence in self to provide for family. And of course, that then trickles down to long-term mental health. And I think that's definitely something that as employers and employees, we all need to be aware of as well as a major factor. Because in the minds of employees, they're saying, if I don't show up tomorrow, it's neither here nor there. They're just gonna hire someone else, probably for less. So why put in the effort?
Yeah.
So it definitely interlaps with everything.
And sorry, I think it's really interesting that you both used examples from the hospitality sector. Um, I think I read an article the other day in the newspaper about the tourism industry having challenges recruiting persons back into the industry. I think people have left, they've realized how fickle the industry can be, and the same expendability that you spoke about, they felt that, and they're not willing to put themselves in that kind of position again. So several of them have used the opportunity to upskill and are actually looking to get into other industries. um, but piggybacking off that, you talked about the performance issues that come along with um, the stress or the mental health challenges, but how about the other ways that it manifests itself in the workplace? For example, in a hospitality environment or a customer service environment where these people have to face customers every day, and there's this kind of emotional labor that they have to contend with regardless of how they feel. So
Mhm.
any thoughts on that, and how employees can manage that?
Well, definitely I can come in here. As you said, that performance is not the only facet or consequence in terms of reduced performance when it comes to mental health triggers or stress. We can see when it comes to what we call labor intensive jobs, especially where you're interfacing with customers on a day to day basis and you're under strain, that you tend to lash out. So you find that there's this heightened aggression, frustration, which is really a function of anxiety. It could be a function of some form of frustration linked to some unmet need. A lot of hotels, yeah, if you're thinking about that context, a lot of hotels have cut back on hours, for example, cut back on pay. So here you have a situation where you're expected to produce the level of service, the quality of service, but your remuneration from your vantage point is not commensurate with this. And then you have customers who, of course, are going to have their own expectations. They're going to be asking you questions. They're going to be bombarding you with requests. It is likely that you can, as I said, go off the handle. I've seen some employees too that make a lot of accidents or errors in the job that they perform, and this is something that it could be very dangerous because when you're under stress, you're under strain. Let's say you're working on that side of hospitality, dealing with equipment, dangerous equipment or dangerous machinery, you can actually get hurt or worse because of the lack of concentration, the lack of focus that is occasioned by heavy mental health strain.
Yeah, and adding to that, I find that there's a lot of emotional compartmentalization happening to the point where persons are numb, and completely ignoring. So there are some persons that go into survival mode, stay in it, and is just on autopilot at work. And I don't know if you guys use this phrase as well, but pressure bust pipe, right? So of
Yeah.
course, you go and go and go until one day it's just that one customer that says, "Hi, I need to speak to the manager," that person decides to just blow up. So we find that we've had a few instances of
Mhm.
explosive instances where persons are storming off of work for seemingly a small incident. But then when you take it apart or examine it deeper, you realize that there's a lot of compartmentalization. I find that there's a lot of messaging pertaining to leave your personal issues at the door and put on this cape of professionalism. And while there are
Mhm.
standards of performance and so on, at the same time we are not robots. And I think that oftentimes some of these narratives that come with wanting to manage and wanting to get the best out of persons right now, it does affect persons in the long term.
Yeah, and that's a absolutely spot on point, because I was making a point the other day about the fact that you're doing Devonish at work, you're doing Devonish at home, you're doing Devonish who's the family man.
Hmm.
I can't separate those different Devonishes. They all come with me to the workplace. So if I'm the doing Devonish that was abused by his wife, and the doing Devonish that is taking care of his sick father, all of those things come
Yeah.
with me as a total person. So when managers say, take off that personal or leave that at home, or it's easier said than done. It's not
Mhm.
possible.
And in all honesty, a bit unfair too.
Yeah,
it,
it
it's
is.
it's it's reinforcing this culture of not allowing yourself to feel. And so again, it goes back to making our jobs as counselors that much harder, because most of your initial sessions is just allowing persons to admit how they're feeling, because every other message that they get in every other facet of life is, no, you can't feel that now because you have this to do.
Mhm.
So it's definitely counterproductive to the whole mental health and wellness thing, movement, I should
And I
say.
think too that beyond just the pressure busting the pipe at work, there's also the repercussions at home, because there's this performative element to work that you don't have to necessarily put on at home. So many times persons take that stress and they channel all of the negative energy into their home life, and then
Mhm.
you find cases of domestic violence. And one of the things that persons talked a lot about during COVID was the increase in the incidences of domestic violence. And so I think that we need to realize that mental wellness in the workplace has repercussions outside of the actual workplace. It has repercussions for society. And so if society is not well, you know, we're going to have all sorts of challenges. And if you look at the US, for example, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like that's the perfect example where you see people, going into workplaces and shooting up their workplace because of,
Absolutely.
you know, so we don't have that here, and I thank God for that. But the thing is, we don't want to get there either. So it's really important for us to manage that. We have Crystal's Corner with us, and she has a question. Crystal says, "Sorry to be late." It's okay, Crystal. But for those finding it difficult to find other job options, staying sane becomes so difficult. How best can people cope? So who wants to take that first? You want to go, Dwayne?
Well, I can pick at it. Thanks, Crystal, for the question. I think it's a very salient question of the time, because right now we have so many people on the breadline. They're looking for jobs. The labor market
Yep.
is quite slack. So we have a lot more persons unemployed than we have job openings. And it's easy to say to someone, I'll pray for you, or keep looking and so on. But remember, a lot of these persons would have been laid off or furloughed, and they still have commitments in terms of paying their mortgages, paying the bills. They have children at home that they need to feed. And I mean, to be honest, something like this requires that social support system or safety net. It's absolutely critical that, I mean, that the government, for example, government service, and I know we can't put everything on government, but I've known that the Social Security, the NIS, that we typically would rely on, and when we've been laid off, and given that we've paid our contributions, we have access to unemployment benefit. That they can probably find some creative ways in which perhaps those benefits can be redeployed in different ways. I'm thinking that there are institutions, like for example, the Ministry of Labor. I was in St. Vincent and the Grenadines a week ago, and what they're trying to do is to develop special services and programs for persons who are unemployed, to get them reskilled, to kind of locate them to the right job opportunity. So what effectively they're doing is that they're assessing the job market and trying to pair or couple persons who are unemployed so that they get first choice to jobs that are being advertised that they can actually pair. So I think there's where the government can help. There's where the private sector, of course, can also help, because if they're registered to these programs, what I call a match made in heaven. One program that I was trying to push for Barbados, this match made in heaven, is where you imagine you have this system or this particular platform where employers can advertise and shop for unemployed workers. Unemployed workers can also advertise themselves and their skills, and there's that match made in heaven, almost like a dating site. And I think the Ministry of Labor, the private sector, civil society can come in here. Of course, we don't have that external social network that we had in the past, where family members can support others. We've found that, especially younger people, they go and live by themselves with their families, and that extended family that we had that would support, sure, situations where people do not have the capacity to pay. We are lacking that. I can call and shout to the mountains that we should go back to that, but we have to be realistic. I don't think we're going to go back to that anytime soon. So it means that other players of the economic system, private sector, government, social security, would need to come together to think about programs that can allow those who are unemployed for a long time, to recover back into the job market. That's all we can do.
I also want to add, in terms of coping on the day-to-day level too, because the reality is that it's so easy to get used to being in despair. And so I think definitely it's a time where persons have to explore the coping mechanisms that work for them. Oftentimes when we're in a state of distress, whether it's as severe as being an anxiety disorder or what have you, is that oftentimes we don't draw on the things that help us, or an inner unwillingness to try things that will help, such as seeking out social support, leaning on that friend that will allow you to vent and be like, I don't know when I'm going to get a job, just being able to get it out. And of course, allowing yourself to be proactive, because unfortunately in Jamaica we don't have as robust a program or options for persons that are unemployed. And so oftentimes the person is kind of left on their own to kind of figure things out. So I think being proactive in terms of getting out there, speaking to persons and sharing what the concern is, because again, we have a culture where we keep our problems close to home, and so persons aren't even aware that you are desperately looking for a job or would like one urgently. And so you're just kind of sitting in that cycle of distress. And so learning your different coping mechanisms to survive the daily in and outs of that situation is also important as well.
Sophia, just wanted to let you know that I saw your question, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, you said, Zoe, that we need to look at our different social support systems, whether they be friends, etc. But I want to highlight the fact that there are certain things that persons go through that they definitely need professional help. That individuals who are not trained do not have the capacity to assist them. And so an individual that takes on somebody's really serious mental health challenge can become sick themselves. But the
True.
challenge with our cultures is that persons are not um, comfortable because of the same stigma that we spoke about before, where, having to deal with anxiety or stress or any kind of mood disorder causes persons to think that you are crazy, that you're not capable. And so that's one of the challenges that people have to deal with. But then also, um, if I piggyback off Crystal's question, one of the things that I would have found in my research is that there are certain occupations where um, persons are more likely to commit suicide. And that's
Mm-hmm.
because, or I should say, I found that the professions where persons committed suicide the most were professions where persons typically worked alone. So
Mm-hmm.
there is that element of social support that you may be able to get in a workplace. When we were working remotely, a lot of people were saying, oh, I really missed work. But then there are people who, that's just what they do. They work alone. What can these people do to help themselves to manage on a daily basis for an ongoing challenge that they're going to be having? Because again, there's no HR who's going to come up with activities, who's going to be
Mm-hmm.
doing seminars, um, who's going to be enacting policy, and we're going to talk about the national wellness policy very soon. So how do we advise them? What kind of activities can they get themselves involved in order to cope?
Well, I love that question because I feel like that is a situation that many persons find themselves in. And I'm going to go with the younger generation default, which is using social media and finding your people on those platforms. Because again, some of us may have challenges speaking to a person face to face. There's social anxieties now. Well, not now, but of course, it's more prominent. And so perhaps finding online support groups, on Instagram or Facebook or any of these avenues. And usually with these support groups, there is an hopefully a professional body that's overseeing what's happening in those situations. And so that could be a step in the right direction for these persons that find themselves isolated. And in addition to that, again, wonderfully, there are options for persons to access professional counseling services online as well, and wellness programs and applications on their phones that help to keep accountability for wellness, such as drinking water or walking for 10 minutes, or have you called and spoken to someone in real life for 5 minutes? So there are applications that are geared towards persons that tend to live a solitary lifestyle. Again, there's a lot of best practices coming out of that whole Minister of Loneliness that I mentioned earlier, with a lot of those programs that they're implementing, because they're finding a lot of situations now where they're only finding months after the fact someone has unfortunately taken their own life that they discover the person had done so because of such solitary lifestyle. So since we are leaning into technology so much, I think that we should use it as a positive avenue to assist us in bettering our mental health.
Yeah, yeah, definitely point taken. And I like that last statement there. Using social media, leveraging social media. Oftentimes when you hear people talk about social media, it's usually in a negative light, and we tend to see social media as a cause of all the world's problems, especially with mental health challenges. But I think we can repurpose the social media that we have to serve our own mental health needs. For example, I'm in a WhatsApp group with a team of lecturers from my faculty, and outside of work matters, we check in on each other. How are you doing? There's a concept I was playing around with for last year. The notion of a mental health watch. We talk about a neighborhood watch where you have neighbors who check in on each other when it comes
And
to
there are apps for that now too.
yeah, yeah, and you can use that. You can use those technological vehicles to check in on each other, and you can be on the other side of the ocean. I remember doing my masters, and I had a friend who was studying. I was in the in Nottingham in UK, and he was in Edinburgh, and we checked in on each other. At that time, it was 2007. We were using Skype, and I always kept my Skype open, even in the middle of the night, because he was trying to navigate challenges where he was and so on. But so I think there is a lot to be gained from the use of social media and other technologies. But again, it goes back to training, it goes back to trust. And that's something that I think we need to talk about, because you've made a point, Ron, that there are a number of people who are not going to be easily inclined to share or confide certain challenges to people, because they may very well feel that that trust could be violated, that confidentiality. And I keep telling people that we like to tell persons trust us and trust us. The government like to say trust us, trust husbands and wives telling each other to trust us. But we think we need to ask a different question: how can I be a more trustworthy confidant? How can I be a more trustworthy church member? How can I be a more trustworthy father? How can I be a more trustworthy manager? I think if we ask the question differently, because there's a supply and demand relationship, there's a lot of demand there for people to be trustworthy. So we may have to
For
consider
sure.
how we can provide that supply. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. And so I just wanted to talk about the different types of stress, because I know, Dwayne, that um,
Mhm.
we've talked a lot about stress, and stress is one of your pet areas. So I know that we talked a lot about stress, and often people see stress as a negative thing, but there's bad stress and there's good stress. So would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Right. So the notion of good stress and bad stress is actually lodged within a particular theoretical framework. Not everyone shares that view, but I can
Mhm.
speak to it. So this notion of good stress and bad stress suggests that there these two opposing versions of stress. So the good stress, formally or theoretically, is known as eustress, and it is this kind of positive or beneficial stress. It energizes you, it motivates you to make changes. So the good stress apparently is like, if you found out that you're moving to a different location for a job, you get that kind of tinkling. It's a little anxiety, but it's not really the bad anxiety. Or if you realize you're getting married to the woman or the man that you really love, or you build a new friendship, your body reacts pretty much, I would say, well, similarly to how you would react if it were negative stress. But the thing about it is that it's not overbearing. So typically we find that eustress is transient, and it is not in any way over pressuring on the individual. So if you think about opportunities where people face, where they're good things, you still feel a bit nervous, you feel a bit anxious. There's this kind of jump starting of your emotions. So that's what we call eustress. Now, the bad stress that people call it, the stress that I guess everybody knows about, is distress. Now, distress is that negative, long-standing, overwhelming stress that comes out of things like bad trauma, or very difficult trauma, fatigue. You get headaches. You're trying to meet deadlines. There's a financial crisis. There's a death of a loved one, and it's very difficult for you to circumnavigate that kind of stress. When we talk about distress, that's what we call bad stress. That has a toll, that has a significant toll, not only on your mental health but even your physical health. And effectively, I guess the question is, how do we kind of navigate that delicate balance between the two forms of stresses?
So how do we do that? Because that's what I was about to ask.
Oh, okay, that's the next
I
question.
would,
Okay.
I would
Oh,
want to
I
add
can move.
too.
Right. No, I don't think the question of navigation or balancing between the two stressors, if you remember, the stress of distress or eustress, which is good, bad, and good respectively, is not really a matter of, I think, balancing, because they come from different sources. So
Mhm.
I think all I can perhaps recommend here is know exactly what the triggers are for the different types of stress, and and trying to understand how your body and mind reacts. So for me, if I know, uh, putting myself in an unnecessary, stressful situation. Let's say I notice somebody don't talk to at work. I know when I see them because of a very painful history with the individual that is going to create more strife. It may be someone that I probably previously loved in a relationship and now it's all over and it was a bitter end. I would try to avoid that individual. So you try to avoid distress or triggers of distress as much as possible. Now you're not going to get away with it or from it as much as you can, because you as long as you are alive, you will have experiences of both types of stress. I think it is a way of trying to avoid those areas, and where you cannot avoid those particular triggers, finding ways of coping positively and healthfully when these triggers do arise.
I literally am just going to second what he said, just in different words, because I'm always advocating to persons that they must be aware that everybody's body is different. And so, what may be a trigger for you may not be a trigger for another person. And we also have to, also it ties into this whole, let's not belittle another person's perception of stress, because you may think a broken nail is nothing and another person may be like, oh, this was the one thing I was doing for myself to make me feel pretty and now it's ruined, and we also have to be aware of the different types of stress that affects us. So for example, I find there's a lot of anticipatory stress that's happening around us. So on a Sunday, it's hard for you to relax because the next day is work, you know? Or you say to yourself, oh, I have a hectic week ahead of me. How am I going to manage? Oh my gosh, how am I going to do this and that? And so if you find that you get yourself into certain patterns of stressful thoughts, what you say to yourself, so self-awareness is a huge thing too, for you to be aware of it, because as he said before, stress is inevitable. It's going to happen. So it's a matter of sharpening your coping skills, so that when the stress does actually happen, you know exactly what you need to do to kind of reset or to manage how you're feeling. For example, I know comically for myself that when I know I am getting to a point where I need a break, is that I'll be searching high and low for my glasses. And I'm saying to myself, I need my glasses to see. So how am I going to find the glasses? you know and just that one little silly thing that I find myself doing. And of course, when you pass the mirror, the glasses is on my face, I know, okay, I need a break. So it's important for persons to get to know themselves. We've been spending a lot of time at home, and we haven't actually spent time with ourselves. And so it's important for us to definitely develop a huge sense of self-awareness, so that we know that this is what our body does when we're exposed to stress for a long period of time, or this is what happens when just a little bit of stress is there. It's always important to know yourself, and then of course by extension experiment and figure out what works to help reset your mind when those things do happen.
Thank you so much for that. And just for those of you, I've been reading the comments, and some of you are having some challenges in LinkedIn, it seems. So what I've done is I posted the YouTube link in the comments. So you can check the comments to the YouTube link and see if you have a better reception there. All right, so continuing. Now, I want to jump into the National Workplace Wellness Policy in Barbados. Now, Dwayne, you were the lead author on that, and I actually took a poll on my LinkedIn this week or last week, and what the poll results said that the majority of people did not even know that the um, workplace policy existed. Now, clearly, it's a
That
matter
must
of
be
marketing.
stressful for
And
you, Dwayne.
it's,
Yes.
it's definitely, and let me just say, it's not Dwayne's fault. Dwayne did his job. But, I assume it's the responsibility of the persons who commissioned him to do the policy to actually drive the information out there. So for those of you who are listening, For those who are listening, Dwayne, who are not familiar with the policy, can you tell us a little about the policy?
Okay, absolutely. So this particular idea came to me in the form of a friend of mine, Orlando Gabby Scott. He's formerly of the Barbados Workers Union, and he was asking me, I think we need a national workplace wellness policy. He actually just said the entire name, and I said, well, that's interesting. I think other countries probably might have, and I did an extensive search. This was in 2016, and I've come across no jurisdiction with a national workplace wellness policy. So I thought it was a great challenge for Barbados, and I started the work. It was a lonely one, but I had assistance from various members from the trade unions. We had some contributions from workers and employers, and there were a number of consultations done across the social partnership. And the policy was effectively completed in 2018, and then it was, as you imagine, that there was a transition from one administration to the next. As you know, in 2018, the LP-led government came in, and it was approved under, I think it was cabinet approval under the Ministry of Labor and Social Partnership. It was a big push because in the policy, I made sure that I wrote that the policy should fall within the Ministry of Labor, especially. I know Ministry of Health and Wellness would want to be part of it, but because it was a workplace wellness policy, I think the best domicile would have been the Ministry of Labor. Now, what does the policy speak about? So the policy is, I think, a major communication instrument that serves to guide employers, employees, trade unions. Doesn't matter which industry you're in, guides you in terms of the kinds of wellness programming and wellness interventions that you can actually adopt for your workplace. For example, the policy deals with these 9 dimensions of wellness, which I explored and introduced to the policy. So, for example, physical wellness, which deals with your physical health, your psychological wellness. There was a dimension for financial wellness, because financial wellness is a big dimension of people struggling with financing, lack of financial literacy. You had occupational wellness, which was a subset of workplace wellness that speaks to things like career satisfaction and person job fit. There was also spiritual wellness, that connection, with a higher being, with finding deeper sense of oneself. We had environmental wellness, and this was a favorite of mine because we have a number of physical structures that are known as sick buildings, and people are occupying these spaces. They're falling ill. Managers are doing nothing. There's like neglect. And so it's almost like the neglect of the building leads to the neglect of workers who are suffering in the same building. So environmental wellness is a recognition that you are responsible as management, and there's a shared responsibility with the worker to ensure that your physical surroundings are clean, that they're safe, and that you can live healthily in these environments. So there were a number of dimensions within that policy, and what I did for each dimension, I explained what the areas of each dimension should target within the policy. There's also a number of objectives for every dimension. I can also make that policy available because when I created the policy, I wanted it to be for everyone. It was not Dwayne Devonish's policy. It was the Barbados's policy. So hopefully at the end of this program, I can send a link, and it's actually, I think it's probably on the Healthy Caribbean Coalition website, but I can make that link available for everyone to access the policy. The final thing about the policy, I would say, is that it communicates governance structure in terms of how the policy was to be implemented. Because I was thinking about, there are a lot of these policies out there and they're not implemented. So I made it a kind of a priority to have a major section on how you go about implementing the policy, even a measurement scale, a monitoring evaluation framework, but also a
Beautiful.
governance structure that would oversee the implementation process. And guess what? In 2020 or 2019, and this was just before the COVID-19 pandemic, the Minister of Labor actually took the recommendation, and it was a kind of a bold recommendation to create a committee, a national committee. I actually call it that, National Committee of Workplace Wellness, and it is actually live and running. I actually had a meeting last week, The committee was in abeyance though in 2020 because I think for 2 years, because the government was fighting with the pandemic, it went into that abeyance and it was recovered actually in the latter part of 2021, and we've had a number of meetings now. And what I've done for the committee, as the Citizens Party Committee, Minister of Labor and Social Partnership is the chair, so I'm just a member. But one of the things I've done, just completed, is a 2-year implementation plan. And the first thing I can tell you now is going to be focused on education and awareness. And Ron, that statistic, we're hoping that skyrockets in terms of the percentage of people who are aware. I know it's a small statistic, and it's probably under 30%, but hopefully we're hoping that by next year, once the plan is implemented, we want to start in September. By next year, September, I'm hoping that awareness is much higher in terms of not just the policy, but what these dimensions are
Wonderful.
and what they mean for workers.
Feel free to expand it into a Caribbean version, yeah.
Excellent.
And
I
if it
actually
feels like too much, just come to Jamaica and we can
No,
work
I
something.
trust me. I'm
Yes,
going to share. I want this to be rubber stamp across I think
I
it was
love this.
in Barbuda. Yes, I made a presentation and I ran a survey. I did an entire presentation on the plan, on the policy, and people say we want this here. So it's just a question of will, and will from the government, private sector, and even if the government doesn't want it, I think it can still
Yeah.
find a home in other countries in some space, but even if
I
it's civil
definitely
society.
feel like the corporate world of the
Yeah,
Caribbean would definitely take it on.
definitely. Thank you for that.
Wonderful sentiment. Love it. Love it.
Right.
So we have Simone Francois Whittier saying, please, Trinidad needs one too.
Yeah.
And Gail is asking if the policy is live and running and being used by companies.
No, not fully. Remember, we would have only recovered the meetings because we only had a first meeting just before COVID. So we had about literally 3 meetings since the convention of this new committee, and our first order of business in the first year is to increase the awareness and education of the policy and the dimensions. And actually, in the second year, what I have proposed as the implementation, in the second year, I want us now to go to business. I created this whole concept of something known as special wellness assistance programs. So this special wellness assistance program in the second year of the run of the policy, which would be 2023 to 2024, we want employers to be able to come to us, or we go to you and we support you in building well organizations. So we're not using the adjective healthy anymore. We want well individuals, well organizations, well communities, and well nations. So that's how we're going to approach it. So hopefully by 2023, 4, we should be in the company.
So my question, Dwayne, because when I looked at the policy, there's a lot of guidance, like you said, on how companies can implement it. So do you recommend that persons just go ahead and look at the policy and start doing some implementation, or do you think it's best for people to wait on guidance from the wellness committee on how to implement?
Well, the thing about it is that, I mean, the policy is written in such a way that, yes, a single organization can take it on board and even operationalize it to fit their own context.
Yeah.
Like, for example, within the policy document, I've created what I call a wellness measurement tool, and it created names. So this wellness measurement tool, on every dimension, you can actually indicate the extent to which, one, you're educating your workers, you're creating enabling opportunities, you're engaging or involving workers in the wellness design and implementation, and you're encouraging through incentives. So I call this the 4E framework, a paper that I'm writing on that particular model. And organizations can do that. Now, what I would say in terms of kind of a middle ground, if you do take it on board, when the wellness committee and its various organs actually get to work in the industry, I would like to have a way of evaluating from our standpoint. So we become the monitoring evaluation mechanism. So even if you've gone ahead, we can come in and evaluate and provide recommendations and tweaks to improve what you have as that experience.
And can I also add to not to take away from the policy and all of that, but I have assisted in developing or in developing several workplace wellness programs in various corporations and schools in Jamaica here. And I know that persons listening might feel quite intimidated by this whole program and implementation and hearing about the 1 year, 2 year plan. And I want persons to recognize too that you don't have to tackle it from that, robust level. It could be something as simple as having 5 minutes every day where you actually just stop and talk to your staff. And when you
True.
say, "Hi, how are you?" you stop to listen for the answer. Or having mandatory lunch hours where you tell persons, "No, you can't take the hour right, um, an hour early from work. Take your lunchtime at lunchtime so you can rest," things like
Mhm.
that. Or just having a birthday club. Little things can be done to kind of jumpstart that kind of camaraderie or that kind of social support within the workplace. Or even just physical exercise program where you guys meet up on Saturdays and go for a walk, or have fun days or homework program for the kids after school when they come to the office, things like that. So I do want to add too, because my background is also health education, where I
Mm.
literally was going from school to school and workplace to workplace for about 7 years, literally just teaching persons how they can make wellness something accessible and easy. So, as a lot of the times when we talk about this topic, persons listening, struggling with their own issues, may think to themselves, "Oh my gosh, this sounds way beyond my pay grade," or "This feels overwhelming just thinking about it." And it doesn't have to be this overhaul where you get up one morning and, "Oh, I'm going to be well in all 9 dimensions today." It can
Exactly.
literally just be, "You know what? I'm going to make sure that for one advertisement per day when I'm watching Netflix or a YouTube, I'm going to stand up and just jog on the spot." Or I'm going to make sure that I reach out and tell someone how I'm feeling today, whether they respond or not. So, in all of these wonderful policies from the top, you from your end can do things to
Absolutely.
to, to make a change as well.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And it actually reminded me of one of the things I had in store in the first year of the implementation. I was thinking about a national annual calendar of wellness where at least, well, every
Caribbean
month,
Wellness
you,
Day.
yeah, yeah, yeah. For example, so every month, so let's say we start rolling out from September. Every month after September, there's a wellness activity
Yeah.
that can be either owned by the committee or co-owned with a private sector entity or industry, and we stick to that. The same way that we have a crop over calendar that we had before the pandemic, we
There
can
you
create
go.
this concept that there's this day in the month, the last Friday we do something. We can do it across the different dimensions, but
Hmm.
as Zoe said, it can be something small that
Dwayne,
contributes to
sorry to inter-
that journey
Dwayne,
to
sorry to
wellness.
interrupt. I missed the first part of what you said just now. You were
Oh, I had
sticky.
some internet issues. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So let me just.
You were
No, I
talking
was
about the
saying that
annual
the annual
something.
calendar. So I was saying that this annual calendar idea that I put forward to the committee, where every month of a given year we have at least one or two activities, national activities that would celebrate wellness, that would encourage wellness, that would
Hmm.
promote wellness in some way. It could be where somebody makes a recommendation. It doesn't have to come from the committee. So we can have like a competition where people think about different activities and we actually run it on the calendar. And we may run it for every year or in particular points of time, we may change. So it becomes new and novel and
Yeah.
something that everybody can enjoy.
Yeah, just to add to that, an example, what I had in my schools back in my health education days is that we would have like the last Thursday of every month, right after devotion, all the schools in that district would stop and play through the intercom. I like to move it, and everybody has to stop what they're doing and dance for the fullness of that song or the electric slide. So it would be some kind of song for 2.5 minutes, and then that was it. But once a month at least, everybody knew to stop what they were doing and just let loose, and that kind of thing. So it could be cute sentiments like that, that can make a real difference to person's day, wellness, and add to the sense of camaraderie as well. So,
Yeah.
there are lots of ways of doing it, and it can be a fun thing. I don't want persons to think of wellness like a burden, like, oh, just another part of adulthood or survival. Wellness can be a fun and wonderful thing. And of course, as you continue to be well, you will want to perpetuate it. But it's to get the momentum going that is often the hardest part.
Oh,
So I don't want persons to be talking themselves out of it as they're listening, that, oh, this seems something like only fitness gurus can do, or, Doc is talking about it right now and he writes the policies. So, and of course, even though we are talking about it, we know better, but we don't always do better either. We're all
It's
work in
true.
progress.
very
Sometimes we're doing great, and other times you're just like, you know what? I'm gonna have the fries, you know? So, just be gentle with yourselves when you're thinking about wanting to jumpstart the wellness program for yourselves.
So, Zoe, you spoke a lot about physical wellness. And so we know that there's a correlation between physical wellness and mental wellness.
Mhm.
So, do you want to speak a little bit about that for persons who are having challenges with their mental wellness, but they need um, a little bit more assistance, things that they can do um, things they can do physically
Mhm.
to be better mentally. Can you share some tips?
Well, oh, for sure. Where physical wellness is concerned, and again, I am no expert on the matter in terms of practicing, um, because many of us, like myself, find comfort in food. So when I'm sad, you have that extra portion, or you're like, nah, I will have this fast food item. But in terms of physical wellness, when we hear things like 20 minutes of physical activity each day, it doesn't mean 20 minutes at once. It could be 1 minute now, 2 minutes later, and you just stagger it throughout the day. Things like drinking water. There's so much research that shows the correlation between physical health and mental wellness. Exercise, being physical, going out in nature, vitamin D, all of these things release endorphins and tell our body that we want to feel good. And so by getting those kind of juices flowing, kind of encourages ourselves. One of the major screening tools that we do when persons come in with symptoms of depression is evaluating if they are getting their vitamin D and B12 intake. So something as simple as a vitamin deficiency can be triggering your depressive symptoms. Similarly, with anxiety, looking at your diet, like caffeine and high sugar and all of these different things. So, making little consistent changes can make a huge difference. So, drinking the water, just swapping out one drink with the water a day can make a huge difference. A lot of the times, I see a lot of these Instagram memes that say, when your girlfriend is acting up, when she's having an attitude, she's probably hungry. There is a correlation between our physical wellness and our mood. We get hungry, hungry and angry at the same time. And so, it's a similar thing when it comes to our mental wellness and our happiness. So by moving, getting the blood flowing, drinking water, nourishing ourselves, with the correct vitamins and getting all of that in, it makes a huge difference. And so, like I said, it doesn't mean you have to go out and get a gym membership tomorrow and hire a personal trainer. It could be something as simple as, whenever I'm watching a movie, whenever an ad comes up for that 30 seconds, I get up and just jog on the spot. Little changes like that every day, consistently throughout the day, makes a huge difference. If you find that you work from home or at a desk, you have quite the sedentary occupation, it could be that every time you complete a task, you take the flight of steps and come back. You take a walk out. And again, it helps with your ability to concentrate as well. Being physical helps you to focus better. There are so many benefits, and it's very subtle. So it's don't expect a dramatic difference right away. And so, like I said, just little consistent changes in the direction of being physically healthier makes a huge difference to your mental outlook. If you look at something as simple as, when you're hungry, You feel like the world is ending. You're like, how am I going to go on? I cannot manage. The day is just so hot. And the moment you are full, what happens? You're humming, you're dancing. All of a sudden, the sun is shining beautifully. It's no longer melting, right? So similarly, you have to take that attitude with your physical health and see how it correlates to your mental outlook as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
All right. So,
Mental-
Troy, I just want to say I see your question. I'm going to come back to that. But I want to ask Dwayne about occupational wellness. And you talked earlier about job person fit and the importance of that um, for mental health. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So occupational wellness is actually one of the 9 dimensions that I advance in the policy, and it speaks specifically to experiences within any occupation. You can be self-employed as a mechanic. You could be working, engaged in an organization in a manual occupation. The key thing about occupational wellness is having that satisfaction with life and work. Is almost that balance. And we've discussed this even recently on this session, that there are triggers that exist out there, not necessarily always in the workplace, but it can be even in your personal life. There's this notion of work-life balance that we really try to achieve. And even a simple example, like remote work, you can have a situation where you're doing so well in your job, you're working, you're getting the rewards, you're getting the praise from your boss, but on the other side, you're getting all of the criticism from your wife. You're not making time. The children are crying. They need you. And the boundary between work and home no longer exists. So you can effectively see that where there's that breakdown in the balance between work life and home life, which is an attribute of occupational wellness, there will be consequences for mental health. Because here you have, going back to the point that Zoe made before, compartmentalization of emotions. So you have a particular way of how you feel about your job, you're seeing successes, but you're quite frustrated, you're quite unhappy with your personal life, or it could be vice versa. So I think, again, this is a shared responsibility that has to be taken on between employers and employees. Having those programs in place, I think that's where the employer comes in to ensure that workers can balance both work and home. And at the same time, employees have to take responsibility in uptaking in those programs, to uptaking those programs to ensure that they're also able to be in a position to gain the benefits from their participation. Because an employer can spend all the money in the world to create the programs. It's for you to take them up, right?
Mhm.
Could I also add to that as well that as the employee too, I find that a lot of my younger patients or clients, I should say, they struggle with what they actually want to be doing occupation wise. And I think a huge part of occupational wellness too, for on the employees level, is also figuring out what it is that they enjoy doing for their occupation. Yes, there is a financial demand and a need for that to be fulfilled in the immediate in the short term, but in the long term, are you really assessing and evaluating and spending time figuring out what it is that you love to do? I'm sure Dwayne would have the latest statistics on the what my old knowledge is that you change your career at least 4 times by the time you're 40. I don't know if it's more than that or less than that now. So I think that, a lot of times persons get stuck in the humdrum of their current position and cannot figure out what it is that they enjoy. And so I think career assessment, career aptitude tests are stuff that they can use as well to try and figure it out, because sometimes it's not the workplace itself that's the issue, it's you not enjoying the job you have. And so you need to figure out what your alternative is or what you want it to be and work towards that as well. So
Yeah.
that could also be a factor that persons can consider when thinking about occupational wellness as well.
Yeah, excellent point. And when people are dissatisfied with not necessarily the organization, but the job
Hmm.
that they do, in the midst of limited options
Yeah.
to find oneself in, then it is a significant battle. Because imagine you're working in an organization not because you love the job, you might
Mhm.
love the organization, but you really see yourself doing something different. But unfortunately, and right now in this pandemic, the
Yeah.
options are quite rare. They're scant, and it is a significant battle, and it would play on your mental health, especially because you're just going through the motion. It's almost like if you're in a relationship, and I know we've kind of moving away from what. But if you think about like analogies, you're in a
He's
relationship.
always talking about relationships.
I
Yeah, I
gather
love it.
that. I'm the
I love
same.
This is
Imagine
But
you're in a
it's
Professor.
relationship
fine.
and you don't feel that this person is really who you want to be with, and there
But
are
the
certain
options
things.
are
But the
limited.
options are limited, and you're saying to yourself, you could be a woman, you could be a man, and you're saying, but I don't want to. The grass is greener, but that might just be something. I don't think I'm just going to stay here. And you stay in that relationship, and it's almost like this kind of implosion that occurs over time.
Definitely weighs on you. And what I always tell clients in that situation is if you know that you want to do something that's more active, you don't necessarily want a 9 to 5, then perhaps you
Yeah.
should find something in marketing where you're going from door to door, or, so at least even knowing, trying to find jobs within the limited options that you have that align with your personality. Because the reality is we spend a lot of our waking hours at work, and so if you're not doing what you love and you are, it can really weigh on you, like you were saying. So I think it's definitely a point that I always encourage, especially persons across all ages, when it comes to discussing their unhappiness with their jobs. That's something that I usually spend a lot of time in exploring with them. And of course, there's lots of online free career aptitude tests that you can look into that tells you, the type of job fields in alignment with your personality type and things like that. If you have nowhere to go from to say, I have no idea what I want to do, so
Mhm,
that that's also a suggestion
mhm.
in adding to that.
Yeah.
And I would say the Myers-Briggs personality test.
Yeah.
I did that again recently, and it really opened up my eyes about a lot of things. I mean, I know my personality, but then I saw the jobs, that were suggested, and the way that I approach work and how I feel about work, and just knowing that made me feel so much better about myself, because I think there was a point in time where I tried to put myself in a box, and by being able to find out my personality, well, not find out, but I guess legitimizing it, as something that is acceptable and just different. Then it allowed me to be able to say, okay, this is why I don't fit into this kind of environment. This is why I fit into this other kind of environment better. And I think that it can make a big difference. So I definitely agree with you. And I think that it's something that you can explore, because the truth is, there are times where you don't have a choice. Um, for
Yeah.
example, the economy, there are things that are limiting your opportunities. Maybe like family, you would like to go overseas to pursue an opportunity, for example, and there's challenges with that. But I always believe in doing the best that you can with what you have, and so you definitely want to draw on the resources that you have to make the best decision at the time. So I want to backtrack a little bit. Troy Wickham asked a question about the Shaw Act. Troy wants to know, how does this policy, this is the National Workplace Wellness
Mhm.
Policy, complement the Shaw Act in Barbados?
Yes. Well, thank you, Troy, for the question. I mean, it's a very critical question. When we started the National Workplace Wellness Policy, we recognized the existence of the Shaw Act. For those who don't know, it's the Safety Health at Work Act. So it's the only substantive piece of legislation that we have that guides, from a legislative standpoint, what we should or should not do in a workplace. Now, the problem that I've had, and I've said this in a presentation 2 years ago, latter part of COVID, that the Shaw Act does not cater to what I call psychosocial stressors. The act is silent when it comes to stress as a hazard. But you kind of have to understand the climate and the time period in which the act was written. The act was written in such a way that, or at such a time when organizations were heavily manual based. If you read the act, even the language about factory work, I mean, that still goes on, but a lot of work now has moved out of factory now into a more professionalized setting. There are people who work in the offices. The act doesn't take into account anything on remote work. It doesn't take into account mental health. So there were a lot of issues and absences of key things, workplace bullying, things like, because what the act would do would be speaking about physical hazards, which would be akin to safety hazards. So if chemicals, for example, were spilled, and how do you deal with that? If you had heavy machinery. So again, the act to me is outdated, and there's a need to either one, make significant amendments to the act, or two, have a supporting brand of legislation that then covers the absences or the gray areas or the silent areas of the existing act. So in the development of the policy, what I sought to do was to then kind of deal with those gray areas. And the only issue, of course, which was anticipated on the conception of the policy, was the fact that a policy is not legislation. So the policy is not there to legislate or to mandate. A policy is a guidance tool. So what I sought to do was to create something that, yes, addressed the deficiencies in the app, but didn't put employers in a position that they were forced to recognize these things. I can go back, let's say, to the UK and in Australia. If you look at their Safety and Health Act, they cater to stress. Actually, they define, there's a requirement in the UK that organizations, I think, of a particular size are required to conduct something known as a risk assessment. And this covers all types of hazards, but it includes stress, triggers of stress and mental health challenges. And I'm calling really for the Ministry of Labor to revisit. Yeah, I can support them in terms of how we can get some legal minds and of course people in health and safety communities to come together to kind of improve the act and to bring it up to date, because there's so many things now outside of physical hazards that we can worry about. So that was really, you might say. So I hope that answers the question.
All right, and we have another question from Lindell Halliday. So, Professor Dwayne Devonish, in your research, have you identified any model organizations in the Caribbean with respect to well-being policies and culture?
Okay. Well, I can't say I've come across model organizations that I can lift up and say, look, this is the quintessential model. But I have come across organizations that have attempted, have benefited from their model or their way of workplace wellness practices. I think I can't say the name of the organization, but one of the organizations I've encountered here have done a pretty good job. What they've done is to set up committees, health and safety committees, but they've rebranded the health and safety committees to also be educational in nature. Because what I found under the Act, going back to the Act, there were some revisions made under the Shaw Act that then inspire or really require employers to have health and safety committees in place. But the function of those health and safety committees was really policing. And I'm a big advocate that health and safety committees should go beyond policing and, going back to Zoe's point, and play a major, significant, I think is the essential role of education and awareness building in the organization. Because if you think about it, the health and safety committee is only a few persons. So they're still bound, they're hamstrung by the capacity that they can deliver. They can't police everything. So if I educate, and this is the concept of education, education means that I increase that capacity so that I'm not the only watchdog. I'm not the only, so I have outside of the committee other members who have a vested interest because of the education that I've provided as a committee. So I have partners Okay, not partners in crime, but partners in wellness that can push the fight of wellness on my behalf as a committee. And I think that should really be the first order of business for any wellness committee within organizations with these policies and cultures.
Yeah, prevention better than cure.
You got that right.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. We're winding down. And I guess we can go to Sophia's question. What recommendations would you give to government and corporations regarding mental health? And I want to add there, well, then again, we've talked about employees because we've talked about things like exercise and diet, and we've talked about making sure, in terms of personality, job fit, that kind of thing. So let's talk about government and corporations. What are some measures that they can put in place regarding mental health?
Boy, I feel like that's such a loaded, heavy, layered question. And my very simple and basic response to that would more or less be making mental health and wellness accessible, making mental health treatment accessible. I think a lot of our frustrations in our field is the fact that, the help is available, but persons aren't aware of their options. And so making it a priority that persons, um, you know, be aware that it is something that they can access. It doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. And in addition to that, making it be as common as any other aspect of life. There's always a discussion about gas prices going up. There's always a discussion about unemployment and so on, and healthcare. I feel like mental health should be just as frequently spoken about as any other hot topic in countries. you know it shouldn't be this taboo thing that says that, oh, you're weak if you need, or I think it should be a part of your checkup. I think that you shouldn't wait until you're unwell to have therapy. Everybody should have therapy. Everybody needs counseling. And again, prevention is better than cure. So being able to readily access and have these mental health checkups or check-ins as part of your wellness or your healthcare regime, so that if something does happen, you know exactly where you need to go and how you can go about getting the help. I don't
Yeah.
know how that implies for policies and all of that. I'll leave that technical implementation to Dwayne. But yeah, that's my simple take on it.
Yeah, yeah. And let me just add, even on that side note, because the notion of a policy can only do so much. I mean, it really rests on the will of the actors in government, actors in
Hmm.
corporation, private sector, and of course, civil society, families, communities. As a collective, I think it's a collective responsibility. And if you think about it, when we looked at the COVID-19 pandemic and it came in 2020 in the Caribbean, we saw the all hands on deck from all of these players across sectors, from the private, the public, the civil society, the church groups. Everyone came together because they recognize that one individual being infected means that there's a family being infected or a household, there's a workplace being infected based on that prospect, there's a wider community, there's a wider country, the entire country. So there's this belief that when there's a condition that has the prospect for collective harm, collective responsibility kicks in. There's a theory that we're playing with. Now, unfortunately, when it applies to a single individual with a mental illness or a mental health challenge, the non communicable nature of mental health challenges doesn't invite the level of attention and the gravity of concern that we saw in terms of the response from all of those players with the pandemic. And I was saying to myself, yes, the pandemic is a serious threat, but the pandemic has come and it will go someday, but we will always have mental health. So
Yes.
for me, the recommendation is like Zoe, mental health has to be top of mind. And as a result, if it's going to be top of mind, it has to be top of the priority list for these actors in government and in the private sector, recognizing the costs, at the same time recognizing the benefits of doing the right things. I keep telling people that is kind of a whole of country approach when it comes to mental health, how we treat or how we train and educate, or even our children to develop empathy. I was talking about last year an issue with Ninja Man, and for those who are on this call, if you're Barbadian, you will know who's Ninja Man and his oddities. And I remember a video that was being circulated on social media, and people were laughing and making, what we were saying Barbados parlance, mock sport, because he was doing these things in the street, and he was, and I was saying to myself, but if I replace Ninja Man, let's say with your mother, your father, your sister, your daughter, would it garner the same reaction? And no, it won't, because what we've done as a society is that we're able to disconnect psychologically Ninja Man from us, so we can't see ourselves in Ninja Man. So it's so easy to objectify him. And I think we've done that with mental illness. We've done that with mental health challenge. And that is usually a reflection of not only a lack of understanding of mental health challenges and illness, but also a lack of empathy. So yes, we spend time teaching our children math and English and all the things that we think they need to make as much money and to live comfortably. But I think an important aspect of life skill or social skill, what we call soft skill, is really empathy. We need to teach not just children, but even adults. There are a lot of big adults, as we would say, that don't
Oh,
have
yes.
empathy, and they kind of conflate it with sympathy. So it's really a lot of work that we need to do as a society.
And even to expand on your point, Dwayne, just incorporating emotional intelligence in
Absolutely.
curriculum.
Yeah.
I see where there are a lot of countries now where the preschool level education is you are able to matriculate onto K1 or to the next grade if you're able to identify feeling words. So happy, sad, angry, frustrated, just nuances. Because I have grown adults that will come to me and I will say, "How are you feeling?" And they're telling me away or they're making different sounds and gestures. They're not actually using emotive words. And so, yes, I agree with that 100%. Love that point that you shared.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
And
And
Zoe, I know that when we talked, one of the things that you recommended that we discuss was the whole notion of taking sick days when you have mental health challenges.
mental health
Um,
day.
so there's this whole debate. Like, this is a question that comes up so often. When you're having a bad, or if you're having a mental health challenge, is it okay to take a sick day for that? What do you guys
It's
think?
just I equate mental wellness, mental illness to having a chronic disease that you cannot see. There is nothing that I can hook myself up to say I'm feeling 7 out of 10 pain.
Yes.
So I cannot say, "Oh, I am in this much pain, so I cannot function." And you just have to believe me.
Mhm.
Similarly, you have to have that sense of self-awareness. And I'm sure the point of contention is always the persons that are taking advantage of these situations to say, "Oh, I'm
Mhm.
taking a mental health day," when really and truly they just want to go to the beach with their friends, which is just as important because that is
Yeah.
also a way of taking your mental health day, to be
Yeah.
honest. I'm not speaking from the perspective of the corporations here, right? But as the individual that may or may not be struggling. Again, you don't want to get to the point where you need a psychiatrist and intensive therapy. You don't want to necessarily get to the point where you need several professional levels of intervention. And so, if you find yourself struggling, overwhelmed with your task at work and your responsibilities at home, and you feel like one of the ways that can help you to reset or regroup yourself is to take a day, I say take the day. Again, it is a difficult thing because it's hard for you to. I know in Jamaica, it might be a lot of persons feel cute going to a doctor and be like, "Hi, I'm really stressed out. Can I get 3 days sick leave, please? Because I need to just lay down and not talk to anybody. Can that doctor justify on a sick leave to say, so and so is unable to complete tasks because they are physically fine but mentally unwell, you know. It's there's still a lot of gray area surrounding it, but I think in the direction that we are going, it is definitely a part of your right to take a sick day due to mental health.
Mhm.
Absolutely. 100%.
All right, and you also talked about grief.
Yes. A huge part of our challenges, you know, as you know, we are dealing with a pandemic, and with that comes a lot of losses. And it not necessarily means loss of death, but loss of lifestyle and the way that we interact. You know, a lot of quote unquote pandemic babies are here, and the culture is so drastically shifting and without any notice. You know, literally many persons can talk about what happened the day before lockdown. They were at the hairdresser, they were in the bank. It wasn't like there was this gigantic earthquake and buildings came crashing down, you know. And so there's a lot of grief being experienced on a lot of levels. And of course, grieving the lifestyle, you know, grieving the relationships you once had, the way you interact with people, wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, sanitizing, all of these different things. And it can play a huge toll, take a huge toll on your mental wellness as well. A lot of people are grieving, and of course the actual physical loss of persons and loved ones, and a lot of them are cumulative. Every time you turn on the news, you hear about persons dying, you hear about violence, not just illnesses and having to do with the pandemic itself, but just constant losses as well. And a lot of persons are caught between, what do I do with myself? Do I still keep going to work and act like life goes on? Or should I stop and take a moment to actually feel all of these feelings? You know, you have Kubler-Ross's theory that you have 5 stages of grief, 5 emotions that you experience in grief. And it's not linear. You go back and forth and you ping pong between them, and you go through all the motions. So of course, you know, persons find themselves wondering, can I take a sick day because I am grieving? And many persons can only justify taking a day to go to the funeral. But what happens after the funeral, you know, when everybody else goes back to their respective areas and the place is still, and you're expected to go back to work and function? Should I take time off for that? Yes, you should. You need to. Yes, some persons do better being busy, but the busyness is just a distraction from your actual feelings. And the only way to get through it, and I never say get over it, because you never get over a loss, you learn to live with it. I hate that phrase. Let me just be emphatic about it. There should never be a situation when someone is frustrated, expressing some kind of emotion, and you're like, just get over it. You
I
never
love
get
it.
over things, you learn to live with them. Or learn to work through them. We don't just
Mhm.
get over stuff, you know. It's not a puddle in the road. So, you know, you need to take the time. You need to take the time. It's the only way to face it and deal with it and move forward in a healthy way. Because the longer you delay these things, it's, again, we talk about pressure bust pipe. It's another ingredient for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much for that, Zoe. I think one of the things that comes out in everything that you guys have said is, what Dwayne said, the need for, sympathy and empathy and, putting yourself in somebody's shoes and saying, okay, like, what if I was going through this? What would I need? But the thing is, not only looking at that, but also because sometimes what we need is not what the other person needs. One person may require less than the other, but really paying attention to what people need as well, recognizing that there are differences and being able to appreciate those differences and accommodate those differences within the workplace. So I want to thank you both for coming on and sharing on this really important topic. I think that it was very rich. Well, that's what Sophia said. It was a very rich discussion. I think persons would have learned a lot. I am grateful that persons would have learned about the national workplace wellness policy, because I think it's a very important document. And I think that the sooner businesses and even individuals realize the different markers and the measurement tools that they can use to assess their wellness, the better that we will all be. And I look forward to partnerships even with Zoe and Dwayne. So, if there's any way that you can work together, that would be great, so that this um, mental wellness train, leaves the station, and we can get going. So I want to give you an opportunity to make any final comments if you wish. Zoe, you can go first.
Okay, well, my final wish for anybody is, if you can take nothing else from this, the best way to assess your mental health and wellness is to treat yourself like someone you love. This is what I tell everyone. If you were to take a step back and say, if you treated your house guests the way you treat yourself, would that guest continue to stay at your house, or would they up and leave? Are you feeding them? Are you sleeping? Are you allowing yourself time to have fun? Things like that. So treat yourself like someone you love. That's the best place to start.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I would say this: the greatest real estate that you have is not the house that you have it on, is actually your mind, and what you choose to focus on or pay your attention to clearly influences what you put into that real estate. So I think self-care becomes paramount, and I'm a big advocate of self-care. I know society is quick, especially when it comes to women, to castigate and to broadside women who want to go and relax, have a drink, fix your hair, go to the spa. There are many women that would say, "Oh, I don't have to do that. If I do that, I have to look after my son. My son is going to thing." And I say to myself, "But God forbid, if something happens to you, just drop down. The husband is going to find a new wife, perhaps a younger one. The child is going to find a stepmother, or so we have to recognize that we are here and now, and we have to take charge of our lives. At the end of the day, we can't pour out of an empty cup. So we have to look after ourselves first. Our self becomes priority. So that is my push for everyone out there to you don't take care of yourself. Don't say it as selfishness. Society will say what they like, but you have to look after yourself, and you have to put yourself on top. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's it for me.
Thank you so much, guys. You're getting a lot of love in the comments. People have really enjoyed the conversation and the insight. Um, I want to thank you for being here, for sharing with us. I also want to thank our audience for participating and being here as usual. I really appreciate your support. Just so you know, this is the end of season one. We're taking a break, and so we resume in August, and we look forward to having very interesting conversations and really exciting guests. And what I would challenge you to do is, if there's anything that you want us to discuss, anything that you think would be interesting, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn at Roanne Smith, Facebook Roanne Smith. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, and have a wonderful night. Bye.
Bye bye. Good night, everyone.
Good night.